Today we'll begin to review topics from phase 5 and 6 in order to prepare for our math final. We'll begin with reviewing parallel and perpendicular lines and finishing off our task with some examples of simplifying square roots. So for this mini lesson, it'll be a review of some of the questions that you saw on your task for parallel and perpendicular lines. So example number 1 says, given this equation that we have here, 5x minus 2y is equal to 10, what is the slope of the line? First, I'm going to name this A and this B. For A, we're looking for what is the slope of the line parallel to the one above. So whenever they're asking you to find the slope of a line that is parallel, or they're asking you to compare two lines and tell whether they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither, you have to know what the slope of those lines actually are. It's the only way that we're able to tell if we're not graphing them. And on your task, you're not comparing them by graphing them, you're comparing them by figuring out their slopes. Now, in order to figure out the slope of this equation, 5x minus 2y is equal to 10, okay, the first thing that I need to do is that I need to get y by itself. I cannot compare the slopes of any lines. I cannot talk about the slope of a line unless y is by itself, and my equation is in the form of y equals mx plus b. If my equation is in y equals mx plus b form, then automatically I know that m, the number next to the variable x, the number next to x, is always going to be my slope. So the first thing that we're going to do in this example is we're going to take our equation and we're going to go ahead and get y by itself. So I have 5x minus 2y is equal to 10. Y is the last thing that I touched, so I need to take this 5x and move it to the opposite side of my equation. Well, this is a positive 5x, so in order to move it to the other side, I have to do the opposite and subtract 5x on both sides. Once I subtract 5x, then I bring everything else down. So I'm bringing this negative 2y down, okay, because this minus turns into a negative and it does not disappear. It belongs to that 2, so I have to bring it down with the 2. And on the other side, I have 10 minus 5x, because those are two different types of terms and I cannot combine them. Now that I've brought the 5x to the opposite side, and before we move on, notice that the 5x was positive on the left, so when I moved it to the opposite side, it was negative. That's a way that you can, that's a trick that you can use to kind of remind yourself and check to see if you did the right work. Now I have to get rid of this negative 2 here that's next to the y. Well, this negative 2 is being multiplied because that's negative 2 times y. So in order to get rid of it, I have to do the opposite and divide by that same number. So I'm going to divide everything by negative 2. And I get y equals 10 minus 5x over negative 2. However, in order to be able to compare slopes, or in order to even to just be able to identify slopes, I cannot use this fraction with multiple things on the top. I have to actually break this up into smaller fractions. So I have y equals, first I do 10 over negative 2, and then I do negative 5x over negative 5x over negative 2. Okay? And if I simplify that, well, 10 divided by negative 2 is just negative 5, and negative 5 divided by negative 2, negative divided by negative is going to give me a positive 5 over 2x. Okay, if you get a decimal and you know how to change it into a fraction in your calculator, it's better if you keep it that way. So now that I have my equation, I have y equals negative 5 plus 5 over 2x. Now I can figure out, okay, what is the slope of this line, and what does the slope of a line that is parallel to this one has to be? Well, in this equation, the slope of my line has to be the number next to x, which in this case is positive 5 over 2. So my slope here is 5 over 2. If I'm looking for, in part A, for something that is parallel, that means that the slopes have to be the same, or they have to be equal to each other. So when I write my answer, I can say the slope of a line has to be 5 over 2 in order for them to be parallel. And that is because parallel lines have the same slopes and different y-intercepts. Okay, so if my slope is 5 over 2 in the equation that was given to me, and I'm looking for something that is parallel, then both equations have to have the exact same slopes with just different y-intercepts. Okay, now part B is asking what is the slope of the line that is perpendicular. Now we're looking for something that is perpendicular to the equation above, which means that if I'm looking for two lines that are perpendicular, that means that their slopes, when you multiply them, so when their slopes are multiplied, they have to give you -1. Okay, so if the slope of the line that was given to me originally was 5 over 2, then I'm asking myself, if I take 5 over 2, what can I multiply 5 over 2 by in order to give me -1? And the trick I showed you in my previous mini lesson was, well, it's pretty straightforward. If this is a positive 5 over 2, then the first thing I know is that this number then has to be negative. This is a multiplication sign. So if this is a positive 5 over 2, then the number I'm looking for first has to be the opposite sign, so it has to be negative, and it has to be the flip of what I have. So if I have 5 over 2, then this has to be a -2 over 5. And I can check when I put this into my calculator, or even if I do it by hand, if I multiply 5 over 2, positive 5 over 2, times -2 over 5, it'll give me -1. So for my answer, I can say anything along the lines of, so the slope of the line has to be -2 over 5 in order to be perpendicular, because when you multiply them, it gives you -1. If I multiply 5 over 2 times -2 over 5, it has to give me -1. So on your task, the first thing you want to make sure is when you're comparing any equations, or you're looking even at just one equation, you want to make sure your equations have y by itself, so they're in y equals mx plus b form. Okay, you want to look at the number next to the variable of x and see what number is next to it. That will be your slope. If they are parallel, then their slopes are the same. If they're perpendicular, then when you multiply the two slopes, it'll give you -1. And if neither of those two things are true, meaning that the slopes are not equal and the slopes do not give you -1 when you multiply them, then that means they're neither parallel nor perpendicular. On the rest of your task, if you need help simplifying radicals, you can refer back to the mini lesson that I noted on the directions, and you can use it to refresh your mind on those examples.